You probably think ancient humans lived in fear. Cold, hungry, alone, scraping by one day at a time in a world trying to kill them. That picture is not just incomplete. In some ways, it may be backward, built more on assumption than on anything the evidence actually shows. They had no phones, no hospitals, no grocery stores, but they stood under a sky no billionaire alive today could buy back, walked across land that no longer exists on any map, and shared their world with animals no living person has ever seen. None of that shows up in the usual mental image of a caveman huddled by a fire, and that gap between image and reality is worth taking seriously. The Earth they looked out at every morning was not a smaller, dimmer version of ours. It was a genuinely different planet, one that simply happens to share the same address. Start with the ground itself, because an enormous amount of it is simply gone. At the peak of the last ice age, so much ocean water was locked up in glaciers that sea levels sat roughly 120 meters lower than today. At that depth, Britain was not an island. You could walk from London toward continental Europe across a vast stretch of rivers, and forest archaeologists now call Doggerland. People lived there for thousands of years. Fishing trawlers in the North Sea still occasionally pull up mammoth bones from the seabed, brief glimpses of a landscape that drowned slowly over centuries. The coastline in your head is not fixed. It is a snapshot, paused mid-process. The same ice created something even stranger in North America. As it melted, meltwater pooled into Lake Agassiz, a body of water that grew larger than all 5 modern Great Lakes combined. At its peak, larger than the Caspian Sea, the biggest lake on Earth today. For thousands of years it was simply there, then it drained away entirely, in stages, over centuries. Search satellite images today and you will find nothing. No lake, no shoreline, only faint traces in the soil that took geologists decades to piece together. The ground was not the only thing quietly changing shape and disappearing without asking anyone's permission. Look up, and the sky was rewriting its own rules too. Around 41,000 years ago, Earth's magnetic field weakened dramatically, dropping to roughly a tenth of its normal strength. Researchers who modeled this event, known as the Lachamp excursion, found it let the aurora wander far beyond the poles, with simulations showing glowing skies reaching over much of Europe and even northern Africa. The lights people fly to Iceland just to glimpse once in a lifetime may have appeared on ordinary nights over Egypt and Spain. This is a fairly recent finding, built on modeling rather than direct observation, and scientists are still refining exactly how far the effect reached. But even with that caution attached, it is strange to picture someone in North Africa watching color bleed across a sky that should never have shown it there. The animals were on a different scale entirely, and nowhere is that clearer than on the islands that became New Zealand. With no large land predators for millions of years, one group of birds grew to a size that looks almost invented. The largest moa stood over 3.5 meters tall and could weigh close to 250 kilograms. Hunting something that size required a predator built for the job. Haast's eagle, the largest eagle known to have existed, nearly twice the weight of today's biggest eagles, capable of diving from height and crushing a moa's skull with talons, evolved for exactly that. When Maori settlers arrived roughly 700 years ago, the moa were hunted into extinction within a few centuries. Haast's eagle, having lost its only prey, vanished not long after. New Zealand was not an isolated case. On Madagascar, 6,000 miles away, on an island that had drifted in near total isolation for tens of millions of years, a different giant walked the forests. The elephant bird could not fly, stood up to 3 meters tall, and laid the largest eggs ever produced by any known vertebrate, dinosaurs included, some holding the equivalent of roughly 150 chicken eggs inside a single shell. It survived for millions of years, with almost no natural predators. Then humans arrived, and within a relatively short span on a geological scale, the bird was gone. Not every part of the ancient world was harsher than ours, colder or crueler at every turn. Some of it was almost unrecognizably gentler, and the biggest desert on the planet, of all places, is the clearest proof of it. Where the Sahara sits today, a shift in the African monsoon system once turned the region into open grassland dotted with lakes, a period researchers call the Green Sahara, running from roughly 11,000 to 5,000 years ago. Hippos and crocodiles lived in lakes that no longer exist. Cattle herders and fishing communities settled along shorelines now buried under sand. Rock art on the Tassili Niger Plateau in Algeria still shows people swimming and herding cattle in a landscape now defined entirely by dunes. When it finally dried, the people living there did not vanish. They moved, most likely toward the Nile, adding to the pressure that would later help produce one of the ancient world's great civilizations. Here is a fact worth pausing on for a different reason. Scientists studying it do not fully agree with each other. Across the plains of Ice Age North America roamed the short-faced bear, among the largest land carnivores ever known. Based on its unusually long limbs, several paleontologists have argued it could sprint at speeds approaching 40 miles an hour, faster than any bear alive today. Other researchers studying the same limb structure disagree, arguing its build favored covering long distances efficiently rather than sudden bursts of speed. Nobody currently knows for certain which side is right. It is included here specifically because it is unresolved, a reminder that plenty of what we think we know about the ancient world is still being argued over inside the field itself. It would be easy, after all this, to assume ancient humans were simply healthier and purer than we are, untouched by the kinds of damage modern life causes. One discovery pushes back against that. At a site called Tafaralt in Morocco, researchers examined the teeth of hunter-gatherers who lived between roughly 15,000 and 13,700 years ago, long before agriculture existed anywhere on the planet. More than half of the surviving teeth showed clear signs of decay, and only a handful of the skeletons examined had no cavities at all. Their diet, rich in wild starchy plants, was rotting their teeth just as effectively as any modern sugar could. Health in the ancient world was never one uniform condition. It depended heavily on where a person happened to be born and what grew nearby. If the moa and the short-faced bear feel almost too strange to be real, one piece of evidence from Southeast Asia, thousands of kilometers away, says something even stranger, not about the animals, but about the humans living alongside them. At the height of low sea levels, Sumatra, Java, and Borneo fused into a single landmass researchers call Sundaland, joined directly to the Asian mainland, into a stretch of tropical ground larger than India is today. Australia and New Guinea formed one continent known as Sahul. Between them lay open ocean, deep and permanent even at the lowest sea levels of the Ice Age, and crossing required at least 70 to 90 kilometers of water, with no land visible partway across. The ancestors of today's Aboriginal Australians made that crossing roughly 65,000 years ago, in watercraft that left no trace, guided by some understanding that there was something worth reaching on the far side of a horizon they could not see past. It was, as far as researchers can tell, the first time any large-brained mammal deliberately sailed out of sight of land in meaningful numbers. There is one more thing worth knowing before we go back, as far as this video will go, because it changes how everything else here should be read. For most of the last 100,000 years, the total number of humans alive on this planet may have stayed below 1 million, according to demographic estimates researchers have pieced together. Not 1 million in a city, 1 million for the whole of Earth. If that figure is even roughly right, then a great many people a man or woman encountered across a lifetime would have been genuinely rare. Not the way a luxury object is rare, but the way something hard to replace is rare. A stranger crossing your path might be one of only a few dozen people you would ever see outside your own group in your entire life. Some anthropologists have proposed that the human capacity for deep attachment and storytelling may owe something to that scarcity, rather than existing in spite of it. It remains a hypothesis, not a settled fact, but a compelling one to carry into everything that follows. Before closing, it is worth stretching the timeline much further back than anything discussed so far, past every drowned coastline and disputed sprint speed, because there is one piece of evidence that seems to speak to all of it in a way nothing else in the fossil record quite does. At a site called Laetoli in Tanzania, footprints were preserved in volcanic ash roughly 3.6 million years ago. This predates every population discussed until now by well over 3 million years. It is not Homo sapiens, and it is not close. It belongs to an earlier branch of our family tree, known as Australopithecus afarensis. Two individuals of noticeably different height walked side by side across that ash. One recent analysis compared the spacing between their steps to modern human walking patterns and found the gap between the two trackmakers stayed narrow and almost perfectly constant the entire way, a pattern researchers argue is most consistent with two people walking arm in arm, or hand in hand. It is an interpretation, not a certainty, and other scientists have offered different readings over the years. But it is striking to sit with regardless. If it holds up, this was millions of years before language as we understand it, millions of years before fire was controlled, before Doggerland, before the drifting aurora, before a single canoe ever reached New Zealand or crossed to Sahul, before anyone had a single tooth to lose to a diet of wild plants. And yet the evidence sitting in that hardened ash may say something that needs no translation across that distance. Two beings, built differently from us in almost every way, may have chosen to move through their world together rather than apart, and left behind a trace of that choice by accident, never knowing it might still be legible 3.6 million years later. Every piece of this, the drowned land bridge beneath the North Sea, the vanished inland sea at the heart of a continent, the sky that briefly forgot where it was supposed to shine, the birds and the eagle built to hunt them, the desert that was once green and full of hippos. The bear scientists still argue about, the rotten teeth that complicate the myth of the flawless hunter-gatherer, the handful of strangers a person might meet in an entire lifetime, the ocean someone chose to cross without knowing what waited on the other side, points toward the same underlying idea. The Earth our ancestors inhabited was never a rough draft of the one we live on now, a lesser version waiting to be improved into the present. It was a complete, fully realized world, worn away by time one layer at a time, until very little remains to prove it was ever there at all. What survives are fragments: a mammoth bone dredged up in a fishing net, an eggshell the size of a football, a molar with a story written into its decay, a line of footprints pressed into ash and hardened into stone, millions of years before anyone existed to read them. From those fragments, an entire vanished planet slowly comes back into focus, close enough to almost touch, and just far enough away that none of us will ever quite reach it.